All right, good afternoon. I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name is John Kenyon. I'm with the City of Literature organization, and I wanted to welcome you to the 2024 Iowa City Book Festival. We would like to start out by thanking our sponsors who make our events possible: the University of Iowa, the City of Iowa City, the Iowa City Public Library, the Coralville Public Library, Prairie Lights, Iowa Public Radio, the Graduate Hotel, and Think Iowa City are all supporters or partners of the festival. Support is also provided by the National Endowment for the Arts and the Iowa Arts Council, which exists in the Iowa Economic Development Authority. Between events, make sure to visit Merge, where we have a book fair going on, and you can meet and see the wares of a lot of folks that have small journals, small presses, independent organizations that are working to put books in the hands of other people. And I also wanted to share that while book festival events are offered without charge, they are not free. And so we always ask that you consider donating to the City of Literature organization so that we can continue to do things like this. You can visit iowациtybookfestival.org and click on the support button and find different ways to help us out. So today we will hear from author and poet Forrest Gander. Forrest's book, Be With, was awarded the 2019 Pulitzer Prize. Concerned with the way we are revised and translated in encounters with the foreign, his book, Core Samples from the World, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Critics Circle Award. The author of numerous other books of poetry, including Redstart and Ecological Poetics and Science and Steepleflower, Gander also writes novels, As a Friend, The Trace, essays, including A Faithful Existence, and translates others' work. Recent translations include It Must Be a Misunderstanding by Coral Bracho and Names and Rivers by Shuri Kido, and then come back also the Lost Neruda Poems. So now please help me to welcome Forrest Gander, who will speak about his latest book, Mojave Ghost.
One of the people he mentioned that I translate, Coral Bracho, just won the International Lorca Prize. She's a fantastic writer, and I hope you'll check her out. In a brief span of a few years, I lost my wife, the great poet C.D. Wright, my mother, and my younger sister, with whom I'd been extraordinarily close. Ungrounded and unable to focus, I began taking long hikes along the 800-mile San Andreas Fault, eventually passing through the town of my birth in the Mojave Desert. I was often accompanied by a recent immigrant to this country, the artist Ashwini Bhatt, with whom I was beginning a relationship. As the present mixed with my memories and as my tumultuous inner emotions and the landscape coalesced, I felt my sense of self become kaleidoscopic. I found myself correlating my emotions and the stricken landscape with other divisions, the fractures and folds that underlie not only this country, but any self in its relationship with others. This is my first reading from the book. There are no titles for the poems, so I'll be sort of trying to figure out a way of separating or of developing a rhythm between sections. Men arm themselves with facts. They say, already reaching, let me see that. They ask seriously, who is your second favorite tenor sax player between 63 and 65? Each thinks the other is a bit emptier, more cardboard than himself, that he alone made the necessary decisions. Only I live the real, he thinks. I think. Night wind clanging rope against the flagpole. There is nothing in me now of what I was before. That's what he tells himself in order to live with himself. Nearly midnight, on the dimly moonlit porch, his hiking boots lined up neatly at the front door. 3 of the 4 black laces are tucked into the boot's collars, but one has gone loose, spilling from the eyelet to the concrete like a thin blood trail. I found my necessity too was provisional, and whatever was essential in me had gone slack behind certain irrevocable choices I made. She asked quietly if he noticed. What? How the small moths come out at dusk, but the big ones, these, she said, casting her eyes into the darkness, only after midnight. A studied lack of correlation between his eyes, intent on her lips, and what he wants, which is somewhere else. That spangled negation she so casually calls evening. It all changes in the seconds it takes for a parasite in the saliva of a sandfly to replicate itself in the gut and migrate to the fly's proboscis, waking alone into the faintly semen smell of the middle of the night. Back at Lana's diner, watching the woman at the far table sweep her hair to her other shoulder and flash her teeth at her companion. Red sauce, says the woman when her eggs come, and the waitress returns with ketchup. As I'm picking up my check from the table where I've eaten alone, the waitress calls, "Come again," and instinctively I answer, "We will." Handwritten note near the cash register, "Do not lean arm on pecan roll." So I pay up and step into humid, rock-flavored afternoon heat, dark pompadour clouds casting giant shadows. Gonna be a gully washer. Technically, it is stunned, not dead, and though the retractable bolt has obliterated the cow's brain, the nicotine Saturn of its still open eye seems to regard me. What bird wove those sprigs of lavender, mint yarrow, and citronella into a nest below our rusted porch light? Just before the rain begins to blow more rain against the rain. Because he was angry, or because he was depressed and denied it, or because he loathed, was laded with self-loathing, because he soaked in disappointment and boorishness, because depression swallows sound as mud swallows rain, the finer pleas and raw cries of pain he was eliciting from those he loved didn't reach him. Now he finds there's no way to mind the gap between first and third person perspectives. His perception of the world oscillates in and out of referential focus. I simply finds no way, like trying to straddle the scuttle in the attic, nor between the publicity of the world and the self's interiority, not for that matter between past and present, for still I pre-assume you before I catch myself staring into space, wanting to tell you something. Much of my experience is indistinct. God help me, I think vaguely, but every moment rivets you into me. Because the tree line opens contours of meaning other than the ones for which we're prepared, we treat it with suspicion. When he smiled and shook his face no, his face connoted the presumption that you and I live in a different world. He took us in like the scent of a dead animal. But how to sustain attentiveness, how to keep the mind from dropping its needle into the worn grooves of association. My art, you said in passing, is nothing much more than the discipline of an embodied life, articulating nuance, the delicate palette. You paint details with a tiny brush you made yourself of hair plucked from your forearm. They distrust me, you said, because they can tell I prefer my work to their own, which is when I tucked a red anemone under your pillow to bring you good dreams. What else did you say? Fair enough. It is a marriage of equals and without degree. Your trace on me, like rope marks on the well's mouth. Here, have a thought. As for our misfit status, as Brecht observed, the palace of canonical culture is built on not to interpret, to feel life course through you. But I was a jukebox. What came out of me was just what other people wanted to hear. Let's let sleeping dogs tell the truth. I see the lives of others, but not their actual lives. The more I try to remember it, the more the word fades. Time metamorphoses memories and buries them. There's no restitution. Gradually, they fold in on themselves, irretrievable. June morning, the mockingbird triggers my impulse to respond with a standing ovation. Because I gripped what I loved tightly, what I've lived makes it easier for me to leave it behind when my time comes. Because I didn't grip tightly enough. My younger sister died today. My father died today. My closest friend died today. My mother died today. Each of their deaths detonates in iterative simultaneity inside the tissue of my being, unanchoring me, setting me adrift. Such griefs as our graves. How is it I can continue to smolder like this? Why am I not consumed? Summer roadrunners patrol the mesquite and brown barrel cacti, snatching grasshoppers out of the air. As you rub sunblind from your eyes, what to say of the pastel chromaticism of these Mojave sunsets? Here, as everywhere, when you go still, what has disappeared comes forward. Ya me cayó el veinte, and you, an earthbound sun, a radiance. When we return to our car, parked on the laterite verge of the road, I distract you from noticing the dead bird melted into a gruel, its eyes glazed with clusters of fly eggs. Only when we reach the edges of experience do we begin to intuit the more than this. Who will contradict me if I say you were and you are? We drive deeper into the desert, arguing about whether it's possible to love without reservations. When we stop for gas in Barstow, where I was born, a boy offers to let you hold the horned toad he is gently stroking in the direction of its spines. Shifting light animates the room. What is so ordinary about living every day as we do at the threshold of each other? Your emotions always visible in your eyes. In you I find my consequence, my natural history. In your company, irrelevance drains away. But what is it that makes you special? Is it your intensity? It's your ardor. Never a sneeze, but a rapid parade of sneezes. My office door opening, smiling face peering around it. You said You couldn't help falling in love with me because I looked at you with the mesmerizing gaze of a border collie. Last night, we parked in the roundabout at the end of the lane, just listening to the hiss of sodium vapor streetlights and watching cyclones of oak moths rising and falling. We, who are also taking place in this place. The moon siphoned away into clouds. Was I even there? Will I be there when you need me? So what if worlds are boundless? I caught myself filling in with the non-returnable particularity of this one afternoon, squatting and listening to a desert marigold bloom, when the hum of an invisible plane made me suddenly aware of the sprawling underflow of stillness around me. It was not loneliness I felt, but some nevertheless of enchantment. Those constant bearers of meaning bore me. I want to open wide now to the absence of concept, understanding, representation, to the inward flare of exhilaration, to the gratuitous revelation of mineral forces. Isn't the materiality of this Joshua tree, its living presence, more than what it means? An olivine moon. The sum of what he knows of her is balanced on what he doesn't know. Came home early and caught her singing in the shower. His inside stirred, as though for lunch he'd eaten sardines and a parrot. The covenant and affirmation of being his beloved's beloved. But the true explanation of an intimacy is the duration of that intimacy. Like an evening coming alive with fireflies, he feels himself pulsing from vivid amber to green. All that aluminum in the sky around San Francisco, the heavies taking off, flying east or south with us to Mexico. ¿Cuánto cuesta ir al centro, señor? In bushes behind the bar, a whistling frog tries hopelessly to compete with patio speakers blasting rancheras, to die of exhaustion before it can mate. I pump the empty bathroom towel dispenser a few more times for its sound, like a bulldog wheezing. No pueden ver sus propias vidas, the woman at the next table says, as she makes a square in the air with her thumbs and index fingers. A loner on every other stool, staring into his beer. Around midnight, we stroll past a smattering of young people gathered on the steps of the closed museum, where a local teenager strums, and they're all singing Hotel California. By the time I wake, you're back from the market with poblanos and 2 balls of salt. In the guide's truck bed, dirty hiking poles and shin guards, a toolbox welded from diamond plate and angle iron. We pass miles of nothing but desert grass dotted with palmilla. Heat shimmer. Just before we begin to trek between the scalloped canyon walls, he shows us how to rub down our pants with crushed stink bugs to protect against snakes. But here, you said, at the time of our intrusion, you said this zone here is not one of the Earth's sentences, but an overdub of stutters here where we're walking on this slumbering crack, a complex, you said, of tensions right here, and you bent and touched your finger to the warm, ant-fenestrated dirt, while I surveyed the hairpin turn in the arroyo beside us. And then you stood and brought it, your finger, to my lips. You said, "Here," and watched me as the taste, part you, part earth, brought a change to my face. And I'm going to finish with the last poem, which stands out from the rest of the sequence by being a longer poem and the only one with a separate title. And it's called Rift Zone. And approach shoes are it's a genre of genre. It's a kind of shoe that's made for climbing rocks. And a shell jacket also is a jacket that climbers often wear. Rift Zone. And so find myself in a shell jacket and approach shoes, strolling past boulders on the Xeric Canyon path, limbed with mustard flowers, as though it were my garden, as though I'd never drawn those distinctions that separate me out, as though I hadn't long back expelled myself from all that wasn't myself. But where is the human place in geologic time? Is there some quality in me that links I am to the remainder, to whatever is left over, left out? What in the world have I left out of me? Adjusting a headband beneath my hat, I lift the binoculars to my lined face. Displaced by lateral slip, the mountain's slopes have gone wonky. A human life, what is that anyway? Even here in the disturbance zone, I find myself pierced by birdsong, standing among trunks and vines, risen from the ground like the births and messages they are. A ribbon land, this place belongs solely to itself. From the wall of a crevasse, tree roots jut out into air. The fault is the earth's junction box, where its wires are bared. The conflict churns underground, howling out in the faintest of decibels. Of course, there were signs, but no one of us witnessed the ballet of trees as the tectonic strain below them rose, and they inclined suddenly toward each other, from where they stood rooted to the parting lips of a widening rift. The earth humphed and rolled, and the trees bowed forward and held their new pose, which strangely resembles a gesture of devotion. But back at the start, I was occupied with myself, as though I were never to be apart, as if I weren't both in and of it. Of what? So I hiked the long fault for some new point of view, asking, muddled with anxiety, what comes next? Now that I can't claw my way any further from what doesn't resemble me. The earth keeps stretching, knuckling, stretching out from under itself, hungry for a new shape, a new address. It has tossed itself loose from its sheets and risen, leaving behind a note I suppose I could read if I tried. The fissures run through everything, even through my remaining years, which I can count probably on my fingers. I fan them out and stare at their ruptured, upturned faces, the faces of my remaining years. I try reshuffling them, but no. They grimace one through the other. They release a sulfur smell. Their solidity dissolves like long clouds of filth entering a river. My time is here and not. Feet dangling, I'm perched at the edge of what? Listening to the crackle, the extinction of small breaths around me, while crevices bloom from the crevices and dust lifts and catches in dry catches of wind. Heat and silence. Still, the ground insists its openings will be filled. Why not apply? Apply myself over and over. This argument goes beyond me. I, who have never been homeless, groundless, am I just going to stand gobsmacked at the mirror while my years run out? What is left of experience that hasn't been measured? Is there an app for that? As I bend, I feel the weight of the specimen stones I carry in my jacket pocket slide forward as I continue my solo descent along the canyon's seam, as I sip and hold a quick breath, as I slip from sight into a chimney of rock. Thank you.
If you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone over to you. I'm wondering how it felt to read that out loud. I don't know in your writing process if you do much of it out loud, but
Yeah.
what is that experience like for you as the poet?
I remember the poet Alan Grossman's wife saying that her husband kept her up night after night because the way that he wrote his poems was by reading them out loud, really loudly. So I do think that the language comes out of the body, and I do. It's part of my practice to listen to the poems as they come out of my body. And it's strange. This is the first time I've read it to a live audience. Pat Metheny, the jazz musician, would always take his songs on the road and perform them before he recorded them, because you hear them differently when you read them to the audience. For instance, reading to you now, the book, I mean, in walking the San Andreas Fault, which is one tectonic plate guttering under another through California. And I very soon began to realize it was a sort of metaphor of my condition, where grief was on one side of me and this new relationship was beginning on the other side, and I didn't know how to metabolize the two of them together. And I began also to think about how we think about time and narrativity, that it's not very accurate, that we leave out so much in thinking that a narrative moves from A to B to C, that any moment of our experience is invested with our memories, which can be as real as and more real. But the presence of the dead to me, of the dead beloveds in my life, can be more intense and more real than my conversation with someone later today. And that all of that is manifest in a moment of experience. So I'm interested in what Clifford Geertz used to call the thickness of experience. I want to try to get as much of that other stuff in that represents maybe real realism, but contrary to what we often refer to as realism. So in this reading, I felt like maybe it was too morose, that I wasn't reading enough from the joyful stuff. I'll take a look at that.
When you throw the word gully washer in there, we all kind of go.
Oh yeah.
Right.
I'm
glad that you didn't feel
other
the need
voices.
to explain that to a room full of Iowans, but shell jacket. You told us.
You need it. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Funny.
Forrest, that was so beautiful. I was just thinking, picking up on the realism, there was a moment that you said something about what is more than it means. I can't remember exactly what that object was, but that sort of feels like it's connected to like what is the real that is more real than like what is signifying. And it made me think about like how one of the experiences of grief is having and of like studying geology is having a sense of like your own like presence as almost insignificant, but therefore open to other things that may be more real. I was really interested in where meaning comes in and how meaning is really actually not the answer.
Yeah. Yeah, openness is the answer. The meaning that just people that believe in historical meanings have very little sense of history because they've constantly changed. And and I mean, like your book, I'm interested in divesting this notion of direct seriality, of linearity, which I think is this convenient way that we come to describe our lives, but that leaves so much out, often the stuff that is really maybe more important, like what you end up remembering of the people who you love and who are gone will be little details, not the sort of epic things that you had at the moment, but those little details, they catch in you and represent much more than the meaning.
Hi. I'll try to be brief, but
Where are you?
I'm all the way in the
Oh,
back
there,
here.
okay.
It's funny you brought up two of my favorite people, Pat Metheny and Alan Grossman. I want to say just briefly about Pat Metheny that when Lyle Mays died, his pianist, he said, "I can't express how much sadness I feel." And I thought it was interesting because they have, dozens of albums together, and I was like, it's got to be in there somewhere. But
Yeah.
my question is about Alan Grossman. Actually, he has in Sighted Singer, he has this line where he's like, "Poetry is for someone who is in trouble." And I felt this feeling during your reading where I wondered, was there ever a time where you felt the trouble expanded beyond the craft, beyond the effort of language for you? And I'm sure that was the case, but how did you manage through that?
Yes, it's a good question, but you've also answered it accurately to my experience, is that yeah, grief blacks out everything. And after CD died, it was like a year and a half before I wrote a word at all. I didn't want to write. There was no way of imagining, processing what I was experiencing. And I don't think that I read all these books on grief, the 7 stages of grief, and all of it is about metabolizing grief and getting to the other end of it. But I'm not interested in going to the other end of it. I am interested in carrying it and finding some way of carrying it in me for the duration. And when the words do come, they in this case, they suddenly just sort of belched out of me for be with. And but I think it's okay for there to be there. I have friends who and maybe this is a jealous thing to say. I have friends who write every single day and get it done, and that's really admirable. But my system doesn't work that way, and I think for other writers, there are what Frank O'Hara called ascendancies and descendancies, and that you have to be okay with the silences around them.
I was very moved with your reading. Thanks very much for your reading. I was wondering about the structure of the book because, you decide not to put any titles of the poem, and when you read it, it felt like accumulation, like a novel poetry, something like that. And also the first poem are very long, and then they're like the last one are very short. It's like the disintegration of language is doing the structure in the book. And then there comes the coda. So I was wondering, like, how do you work the structure? You decided while you write the poem, you did it after that. So because I maybe there are some poems, previous poems that have titles to your poem. So I was wondering why or how shut that.
The whole book seemed to me like a meditation, like walking the stations of the cross. If you're a secular person, and the cross is the landscape and uh, the feelings that you have. So I didn't feel like there was at any moment when I wasn't writing about the same thing, and that it was connected, and that I didn't need titles. Besides which, I'm really bad at titles. C.D. Wright was great at them and often wrote books only after she had conceived of the title for those books. But I also wanted to develop a rhythm that wasn't broken so much with a title. I'm really interested in the rhythm of a book's reading and its presentation of itself.
Well, speaking of titles, is Mojave Ghost the narrator or the person who's been lost, or is it the whole thing?
So I was born in the Mojave Desert, and the Mojave Desert strongly affected my mother, who was the person who gave birth to me. That's a joke. And she always talked about it through my life. It had really tuned her. And when I go back to the Mojave and to the impoverished little town that I was born in, Barstow, I literally, I really feel my mother, all of her stories, in the little light breeze in Rainbow Basin and outside of Barstow, where she walked and picked up fossils. All of me came out of that. Her fossil collection stimulated my interest in fossils and rocks and led me to major in geology. So, so this hike through along the San Andreas Fault, and then this little parenthetical trip. It's not quite on the fault line to Barstow, was also a way of sort of going back to the place where I was born and carrying my mother's ghost with me. So that's one of the ghosts in the Mojave Desert. I'm also carrying other ghosts with me.
So compared to Be With and Mojave Ghost, and both of them thinking about grief and carrying the weight of that, how was writing both of those different? It was interesting when you said it sort of belched out of you, but I'm curious, between those two collections, what was that like?
I've never had an experience like writing Be With. I thought of even saying, don't buy Be With when you come up. I only read from it a couple times. It's because it's just too painful to me. And it did erupt after at least a year and a half of not writing at all. And it just erupted. This book I thought about and worked on, and it was part of this, like 2-year meditation walking system. So nothing in comparison. And also I tried to be writing about joy also, which I also carry inside me and want to be able to articulate in ways that other people recognize also.
How do you craft something that is such a sort of organic gushing of feeling, emotion, experience?
I'm going to let Jennifer Croft answer that question. How do you do it, Jennifer? I
All right, you don't have to.
don't
answer
know,
it
that's the
either.
art, you know,
Yeah.
that's.
It's all right.
Can you speak a little more to the new relationship that was unfolding as you were walking? And I see how carrying those complicated and sometimes conflicting emotions fed into the poetry. But I think more in terms of being there in real time and the conversations that you were having, did that relationship influence the writing in a more direct way?
Yeah, that relationship influenced the writing at all. A lot. I'm the person that I'm in a relationship with now, Ashwini Bhatt, um, uh, grew up in India, and only came to the United States for the first time as she was doing residencies as an artist around the world, Japan, China, and came to California and started seeing her. But while I was uh, was it that writes about Tennyson's brother, that he was the most morose of the Tennysons. While I was sort of stuck in my moroseness, she's a person who has that gift of being full of life. Which I think is a great gift, like enthusiasm. I think so often we're talked out of our enthusiasms because we want to present as sage intellectuals, but the real gifts of life are enthusiasms and joy. And those are the people that you want to be around. So um, she really changed my relationship with myself and with the world. She's very present in the book.
When did you know that you were to be a poet?
So I thought I was a poet from really early on. My mom read me poetry when I was a little kid. She was a grade school teacher. Her father, my grandfather, who was a Swede, used to stomp around the house reciting all these 19th century poems, which I can still recite. You call me chief, who you call me chief, who no, now I used to be able to recite anyway. Um, and so she was reading me Carl Sandburg and Dylan Thomas and Edgar Allan Poe when I was a little kid. And those rhythms really got into me. I wanted to be a poet. I thought I was a real hotshot poet in high school. And I got to my first semester of college and I showed my college professor, David Jenkins at William and Mary, my poems. And like, read these and weep, man. And and he read them and he looked at me and he said, Forrest, these are terrible. And that was the beginning of me being a poet. Then I thought, oh, this isn't just some gush of my emotions. I need to be reading contemporary poetry. And then I began to read contemporary poetry really intensely and got on the bus.
I was thrilled with your performance and the recitation, and I think you just answered a little bit of it in saying that you were brought up hearing your parents recite. But I was wondering, you bring out the music and the phrasing so well that I'm kind of wondering who have you listened to as a poet, and what voices, literally voices, have influenced you?
Well, most recently, it would be Liz Willis, who was reading right before this. After her reading, I was thinking, oh, I need to completely rewrite my books, all of them. But it's interesting you talked about performance. What I've hated about poetry readings, and probably a lot of you here have been to a zillion of them, like I have, are the poets who just do their performance. They have their memorized lines and their little anecdotes, and and they've put the cloak on of being the poet. And in contrast to that image of the poet, Robert Creeley was really important to me as a person who never put on that cloak and who always insisted on being present to the particular audience at any place. And sometimes that meant he read very little poetry, he just talked. But each place was particular. So I don't want to have a performance. I feel like whatever came out of me was you, Tim, and this audience, this particular contact where you're looking at people's eyes, you're reading their responses, and that's affecting you just like a landscape might.
Questions? We can just, we can segue into the signing part of the event, or if you have another thing you'd like to read or say, set final parting words.
Well, I had this terrific panel before this morning with some IWP writers, some of whom are here, and it's exciting to be back in Iowa for me, and largely because of the IWP. It's just such an amazing program, and I've come to know so many people who have come through here and who've written books here, and they seem to. Is it still Chris Merrill who does it? He's got like some taste, you know. He really gets some great writers here. So I just want to honor them and say thank you. It's an honor to be here with these writers from other places. As we were talking about this morning, I think a language goes dead when it's not open, just like us. When we're not open and vulnerable to the influence of other languages and other sounds and other image repertoires and other syntactical possibilities, that a language goes dead, and that part of what keeps English so fresh is the influence of writers who speak other languages coming here. And
Well, it was such a terrific pleasure to hear you read. That was just amazing. And thank you all for coming. And Forrest Gander will be happy to talk with you and sign copies of the book for you.